night, talking about this Oklahoma State game in particular. You had mentioned it before we started to record. We think from a national perspective, Oklahoma State football, people think of quarterbacks and wide receivers and throwing the football. And of course, Mike Gundy was an accomplished quarterback, and that's what he was known for. But it's been a better defensive team the last couple of years. Spencer Sanders, a very sporadic quarterback, has talent, can run, strong enough arm, but he makes mistakes. They come in, though, at 5-0, and they haven't been dominant by any measure, but they've beaten some pretty good teams, Kansas State, Boise State, Baylor. So it should be an interesting affair in Austin.
Yeah, it should be. And he's like the type of guy that he wouldn't give most teams trouble, but he always gives Texas trouble for the simple fact that he reminds me of Max Duggan. Like, they're not great passers, but they can do some stuff on the ground that really gives Texas trouble. Texas, obviously, like we saw versus Caleb Williams, struggles versus mobile quarterbacks. And he's a mobile quarterback, and he's really good with his feet. So we need to contain him in the pocket and force him to throw, because he's going to throw you 1 to 2 balls a game where you should be able to pick it off and capitalize off of it. And we have to be able to do that when they come in here. And their defense is very good. I mean, I think this is Jim Knowles' like 3rd year, and he came from Duke. And ever since he's gotten here, they've basically been playing like positionless football, just get your best players out there and see what happens. And they've been really good. And it's kind of funny because if they had this defense 5 to 6 years ago with the offenses they had, they'd probably be a top 10 team every year, but they just don't anymore. And it'll be interesting with the next guy coming in. I don't know who that's going to be for Oklahoma State. If they can keep this defense up, and then once Spencer Sanders is gone, they can improve the offense a little bit and get back to what they used to be like.
I guess the program interests me from the standpoint that it's not interesting. So Mike Gundy, about 10 years ago, was at his pinnacle. He had taken this program to a place where it looked like they may break into semi-elite status. They went to some major bowl games. They had the one season, of course, 2011, where they almost made it to the BCS championship game. And then since then, they've just kind of flatlined. They haven't fallen on hard times, but you can pretty much pencil them in for 8-4 every year. And it just seems like he's comfortable with that. And everybody else, they go to a decent bowl game and go 8-4 every year. But Oklahoma's going to wipe them off the map at the end of the year. And they're really not going to seriously challenge for the conference championship or a Big 12 championship.
Yeah, basically, I think you just nailed their history. I mean, the last decade in under Gundy, it's basically they come out of nowhere some years, and then they end up like 9-3, and you're like, oh, that's a really good season. Then there are other years where they're highly ranked, and then they go 9-3. They're basically a 9-3 program who some years underachieve, some year overachieve, but they're basically 9-3. They're nothing more than that, nothing less than that. There are some years, obviously, like Brandon Weeden and Des Bryant. That was a special year where they played Stanford in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, that's been a while.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, and that team was really good. They probably would have made the playoff if they had the playoff back then. But that's really the only team that comes to mind. I know I forget his name. I think Keenan Robinson back in when Texas was in their glory days with forget the wide or that was Des Bryant. Justin Blackman was with Brandon Weeden, but that team was really good. So it's just that's who they are. And Texas needs to win this game, obviously, with a lot of recruits coming in, including Arch Manning. So this is an important game to get under the belt.
Absolutely. Jalen Warren's their guy on the ground, 500 yards, about 4.5 yards per carry, which isn't great in college. 6 touchdowns, and through the air, of course, Tylan Wallace was their guy last year. He moved on to the NFL. It's Tay Martin, 21 catches, about 15 yards per reception, and a couple touchdowns out of him. And again, Spencer Sanders, 58%, not a great mark for today's college football. And he's thrown 5 touchdowns against 4 picks. So that's what you get. Ton of experience, but he hasn't necessarily learned from it. Oklahoma State, Texas. So I'm guessing from everything that you've told us, Matthew, that keys to the game or keys to this Texas season overall, well, the offensive line, you're not expecting much, but if they can some kind of package it to get band-aided together and just play okay, but you're looking for a pass rush as well. That's not a great combination right there.
No, I mean, I think if any coach were like decide like up front, what would you want on your football team, they would go, I want an offensive line and defensive line. Right now we have neither. So I think even I know this sounds crazy. I might consider trading Bijan for an offensive line and the defensive line. I'll take that trade in a minute because our defensive line isn't good. Joseph Osai, I think, covered up a lot of Band-Aids last year with that. And people are seeing the impact he had. And I think he was underdrafted. I mean, 3rd round was a steal for him. And we just haven't had anyone like that consistently. The days of like Brian Arakpo and Sergio Kindle year after year are gone. Clearly, we don't have anyone like that. And then the offensive line we haven't had in 2005 is probably the last like great offensive line that Texas has had. So it's been almost 2 decades. So we need to get back to that. And also in our 2 losses, we've given up over 300 yards on the ground. You just can't allow that. That's death by 1,000 cuts, and that's kind of what another thing in that Oklahoma game that I saw. They're willing to stay with the run, like they're down 28-7, and they weren't panicking. They were just saying, "Here, we can get chunk plays, run the ball, let's do it." And they stayed within their game plan, and they were able to ease Caleb Williams into the game doing that when he came in, and he didn't need to make like super big time throws until a little bit later in the game, and it worked. And we can't stop the run in our 2 losses versus Arkansas, 333 yards, and versus Oklahoma, 339 yards and over 6 yards of carry in both games. That's really, really bad. And shouldn't be acceptable at a place like Texas.
Iowa State's already lost. TCU's lost in conference as well. Texas, of course, losing to Oklahoma. Of course, had they won that game, they would have been in tremendous position. But as it stands, you got to think 7-2 is going to get it done for the conference championship game, depending on who you lose to and how the tiebreakers shake out. But they may be able to afford one more loss, but this may not necessarily be the team that they should lose to. Do you think they get a pretty good shot at getting back at Oklahoma in the conference championship game?
I do think we have a good shot. I think we have to beat this Oklahoma State team, and we have to beat Iowa State. And I agree. I think we can probably lose another game along the way versus any other team, and we'll get in. But because those are like the 2 remaining contenders, since we already beat TCU and well Baylor as well. But I think I'm not really worried about them. And watch, they'll probably beat us now that I said that. But they just don't scare me. They're kind of like Arkansas, but way less talented. And Waco isn't Fayetteville, so they don't scare me at this point. That may change coming up. Iowa State is what really scares me. Later in the year at Iowa State, we always struggle. Obviously, that's been more of a Tom Herman issue, and all those games have been really close to under Herman, even though they've kind of outplayed us. We would always it would always be a close game. Whereas I think Sark, like if he schemes like he did versus Oklahoma in the first half, I will have no problems versus them in my opinion. But who knows? It's Texas, man. I don't really know what to expect anymore with this team.